As noted in the introduction, PES has a built-in object for I/O scanning Modbus TCP devices not managed by PES, third-party controllers, for example. The object is the generic Ethernet hardware device, as seen here. Its configuration is simple: IP address, subnet, unit ID, read and write starting locations, and number of consecutive registers. With this object, we can map to one of the PES managed PAC controllers, and PES will create the corresponding I/O scanner line. The generic Modbus TCP device template will allow for a single I/O scanner transaction line to any given IP address. However, if you have a need to read and write two or more groups of non-consecutive registers to the same device, that will require two separate transaction lines. In Unity Pro Standalone, you'd simply add another I/O scanner transaction line. PES, however, does not allow two topological generic I/O scanner items to point to the same IP address. The slaves must be unique. This will also hold true if you're trying to scan through a bridge like the Modbus TCP to Modbus serial converter. The unit IDs may be unique, but PES will not accept the same IP address connected to the generic Ethernet I/O scanner device. To illustrate our point, you can see here we have two instances of the generic Ethernet device. The IP addresses of both devices have been set to the same. Either one can be connected to the physical network, but as soon as one is chosen, the other cannot. I'm going to go ahead, edit this, and perform a save as. Give it some meaningful name. Naming convention is up to yourself. I could have performed the save as directly here, but I don't like making any modifications or touching in any way the GPL, so I suggested making a copy. Now that we have our modified version, we can go ahead and delete this. Now we'll edit the logic to add in the second I/O scanner line. This block here, the EIOS server, is what's responsible for creating the I/O scanner line. As you can see, subnet mask, ID, read and write length, and description. If we take a look at an instantiated version, that's where these columns are coming from. We're going to simply create another instance of this. I'm going to go ahead and connect these pins. As you can see, I've done the same for subnet mask, IP address, description, and instance ID. And go ahead, right click, create parameter. As you can see, it's taking this description here with the instance name, second transaction description. And I've done the same for these four parameters here. Down here, go ahead and expand, right-click, and create deferred. As you can see, I've done the same for these 4 parameters here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. You can keep the version. Make sure it's approved. And now we can add a device. You'll remember it's under My Library, Communications, IO Scanner 2-line. Now if we take a look at the parameters here, this is the information from the original, our first transaction line. And this will be the information for our second transaction line. As you can see, I've gone ahead and populated my 2 separate transaction lines. Don't forget to map it to a physical connection. And remember, if we had another one here with the same IP address, that option wouldn't be available to us. Now over to topology. We're going to map our new IO scanner device to our controller, which happens to be an M340. Now one thing you don't want to forget is to check the properties and make sure you have sufficient memory set aside for the IO scanner. Now over in Project Explorer, we're going to go ahead and map the communication. One thing to note, earlier when I went over here, right-clicked on my executable, and tried to map the communication, this option was grayed out. After some investigation, I learned that in topology, on the controller configuration, I neglected to check off Enable IO Scanner. So please make sure to not make my mistake. We're going to go ahead and map. And we see our 2 transaction lines that we configured earlier. And we're going to click over here and drag them to our controller. One thing I want you to note is when you're using a controller with more than one communication option port, there'll be separate tabs up here. So if I had more than one NOE or NOC, I would see multiple tabs over here. Make sure you're choosing the correct tab. All the information populated, say OK. And OK. If we come back over here, generate and build. We can then open the build project. And we'll see our 2 IO transaction lines.